All right, episode 71, Digging Deeper. Pete, John, Brandon, and we're going to close out the Tripping Hazard series with questions as a catch-all. And 71 episodes, guys.
Time flies.
That's about a year and a half, right?
That's a long time.
Yeah.
Think anybody out there has watched or listened to all 71?
I bet you John Cumby has. Love you, John.
John
Love you, John.
Cumby, yes. I was going to say, if anyone's out there that has done that, I would take you out for a cup of coffee. But I'm just sure there's so many people that have done that.
Think so sometimes there are weeks where I get it up a little bit later. And so I'm thinking about the people who I've either received Facebook messages or texts from. And it's an act of love, I know. But I know I've gotten some from John Cumby.
Okay.
I've gotten some from Dan. I'm blanking at Buxton. Dude, Buxton.
You know that Dan?
I had Dan. I had
Sorry, Dan.
Spader and Markley in my brain, and I
Okay.
couldn't get those out of my brain.
Okay.
Dan Buxton. So I know at least there's two of you.
All right.
So, yeah.
A lot of name dropping on the front end of episode 71.
Just want them to feel loved after listening for a year and a half.
Yeah. So as we close out this Tripping Hazard series, the hope today is we're going to try to answer the questions that we have not got to over the last 8 weeks, as well as those that came in yesterday from the conversation I got to have with Christopher Frierson. And just for just a point of clarity, and also just to speak on behalf of all of us who've been a part of the Digging Deeper episodes with Tripping Hazards, these questions that come in are anonymous, and it's so hard, just like any text message, context is always king, and we don't know the context to which the questions are being asked. And so if at times we've answered your question and misinterpreted the context and read into the question with either a lack of empathy or maybe too much empathy, or assume this was judgment, or thought, just to know, we're trying so hard to answer these questions, but at the same time not knowing the heart that you're asking the question from. So same thing today. Yeah. There's a lot of questions that relate to yesterday's topic that are extremely personal. So we're hoping we interpret correctly, but just want to put that out there.
Can I ask one of the questions that I've heard asked the most in the hallways yesterday after first service?
Sure.
There was a talk about Pete being part of the same group as Christopher.
Are we talking about context and confusion now?
Yes, we are. So people were like, "Oh, I didn't realize that Pete struggled with same-sex attraction. That's interesting information."
Wait, hold on.
Do you
Somebody really asked you that question?
Oh, I had multiple.
It was circulating the hallway.
It was all over. And
my wife asked me, and she was homesick, so she watched the online service, and she went, "Pete was a part of that group?" I'm like, "Babe, no, Pete was not a part of it." So do you
I
want to?
loved it because I had a chance to stop it, and I didn't.
Yeah, I'll give a little bit of clarity, and I know the second service, it sounded like he did a little better.
He did. No, he actually referenced it. Yeah.
So what was confusing was I joined very large internship program at a big church in Colorado. There's about 200 of us, and it was a kind of a discipleship place to grow. We did a lot of time in prayer and all these different things. We put on a big conference in the year. And part of the internship program was they put you in small groups of 4 and 5, gender related. So groups of 4 or 5 guys, and you would meet with those guys every week as part of, just discipleship training, like your own small group. And what Chris said in the first service that I think was confusing was I was older than most of the kids because it was something I decided to do in my mid-20s. Most of the people were like 19, 20 years old. And Chris was the other old guy in the group. He was 25. So the guy that ran the program saw me come in and said, well, I can't put Pete in a group where the leader's 19 because he's 24, 25 years old. So I'll put him in Chris's group because Chris is 25. But the issue was, what made it interesting was Chris's group was specifically, he had taken a couple guys into his group who were wrestling with that issue. So I was put in the group because of my age, not because of any other factors.
If so, because I also want to be sympathetic, right? I don't want to mock that because there's people that that is something that group would be important, but it was just, you're a married guy with 4 kids, and it just, people were like, I didn't know that about Pete. And so I think it's good clarity.
What was fun though is, after the service, I was able to take Chris to the airport. We got some lunch and talked, and we laughed. We connect really well because we both have really sarcastic, dark senses of humor. So it was very funny to both of us.
And watched lots of movies because he quoted movie lines.
Yeah.
I was like, man, that's just why you and Pete love each other.
And but the interesting is we were reminiscing a bit because this was almost 20 years ago, and the reality is, that 2 years of my life was one of the most transformative experiences I've ever had, because the things that Christopher had to work through and I think if I could really hone this in, it really comes down to Romans 12, 1 and 2. Be transformed by renewing your mind. So what that group was doing was seeking to be transformed by renewing their mind in that one issue. But I came into the group needing my mind renewed in some really important ways. And I had actually, the reason I was a bit older is because I had already been in ministry for a while and had some experiences and was dealing with a lot of hurt and wounds. And I had kind of quit my job and just, I don't know what to do. So I literally just moved to Colorado and decided to try this internship. And I was coming in needing some really important things to change inside of my own mind. And so as they were working through this one specific issue, the process, the healing of changing the way that we think and changing the way that our brains are wired in their way was the same thing that I needed to have happen. So even though I didn't have the same struggle, the struggle that I had needed the same. Does that make sense? Like we had different struggles, but the antidote was the same.
Yep.
Right. Renewing the
And
mind.
so coming out of that internship, we were just even talking about how much more prepared I was to have a healthy, whole marriage following those 2 years. And he was as well, but for different reasons, because seeking the truth of God and letting time in his presence and the word of God and community change my thought process, my thinking, brought about so much good for me. So I laughed about it yesterday. I wasn't embarrassed. It didn't bother me. I think my wife was a little bit like, no, he's not. I'm like, you don't need to defend me, but I'm just so grateful and proud of those years and glad that God put me through it that I just laughed about it. So
Right. That's cool. That's really cool. And thanks for offering that clarity. That was actually a really good answer. So let's get into some questions that we received. We actually received one specifically regarding the conversation yesterday. So we'll get into that one first. Christopher shared how we play the slow game with those who we want to invest in, not making withdrawals, and make deposits to hopefully help them and guide them to Christ, to be transformed more and more into his image. What do you do, though, when you don't choose to make that withdrawal, but they do? Do you keep pursuing them or dust your feet off and try with those who show more promise or hope?
Man, that's hard because once again, it depends on, are we talking about a friend? Are we talking about a son or a daughter? Right? I mean, depending upon who you're talking to. I think that if somebody, as you are making investments and they eventually withdraw and say, I'm not interested and I don't want anything to do with this anymore, like, it's really hard to force someone to be engaged with you, right? Because then it becomes extremely awkward. And so I think that at times I would say, even if it was my family member, like I'm always going to remind people of my presence, whether that's occasionally sending text messages, checking in, see how you're doing, just thinking about you, or just occasionally, hey, would you like to grab a bite to eat? But I'm not going to like smother someone. Even my kid as they get older, like it's different right now. My kids are so young, but I'm thinking once they're adults and out of the house and stuff like that, like I think I'd be conscientious of that to let them know that I'm still here and I know you're withdrawing, but I'm not. In hopes of saying if you do want to reinvest or redeposit, like please know the bank's still open here. But it's really hard when you start moving in that place if you know that they're resistant and want nothing to do with it and you keep coming and coming and coming. I've seen that actually lead to more pain and hurt or like withdrawal even greater than benefit.
Sorry, I just want to clarify because I don't know either. I know when Chris was talking, because I know his language, he's a friend of mine, when he used the language withdraw, he didn't use it in the relational sense of I'm leaving you.
Right.
He used it in the sense of I keep taking from you.
Yeah.
Like, hey, help me. Rather than like, I'm here to help. I'll give. It's more like, because having these, and none of them are listening, so it's okay. I don't think having these guys who were constantly like, Chris, help me. Chris, I'm in crisis. Chris, calling in the middle of the night. Like he would really, just to give you an example, like Chris would say, hey, if you feel like you need to open your computer and look at things that are going to cause you struggle, pick up your phone and call me. I don't care what time of day it is. Like to Chris, that's a withdrawal, right? You're taking a withdrawal on my time. And so for him to say the long haul is like, you need to be ready potentially to know that these guys are never going to give back to you. These guys were never going to give back to anything to him. they were just going to be pulling from him and taking, are you willing to do that? I don't know if the person asking this question was asking it as they're leaving me. Should I keep pursuing them?
Yeah.
Or they keep taking from me and don't give anything back?
Yeah.
That's a different way to read the question. Might have a different answer. I don't know.
And it's definitely like when I was reading it, the way I considered it was, let's say you're loving on someone who identifies as gay or whatever, and you're loving on them, and then one day they go, do you think I'm going to hell? Or do you think, like they just ask the question and you're like, oh, I wasn't ready to have this conversation. I just wanted to keep on loving, and then because of your answer, they're angry or upset. Like that's kind of how I was reading that question of that situation was forced upon you. You weren't trying to make a theological statement on their life. But they were like, well, you hang out with Christians, so what do you think about it? And I mean, it's definitely tricky.
That's interesting. We all three of us read that question differently.
Yeah.
It goes back to how you started the conversation.
That's exactly what we're saying. I'm not sure what the context is, but there are three different contexts that we tried to address right
Three
there.
different answers.
There are three different answers.
Yeah.
I thought another thing that I thought was interesting though was the last question on it. Do you keep pursuing them or dust your feet off and try with those who show more promise and hope? And this might be like, again, reading into it the wrong way, but I know that there are so many people who gave their life to Jesus or passionate Jesus followers who showed no promise or no hope. Like they were not the person who you thought would give their life to the Lord. So I would just maybe like caution that kind of thinking towards people is like, oh, this person shows promise as a Christian, or this person like nonetheless, like we're hoping and we're praying for these people, all these people. And even if they seem like the most avid Christian killers like Paul or Saul, there's no like someone who shows more hope as being a Christian versus another. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and you just never know that. I mean, pain usually is a unifying element that draws people to dependence on God or rejection of it. But generally, people's hardships is when they kind of lean in. And someone might not show promise right now, but if there's hurt that comes down the road, if there's a breakup, if there's a fallout, whether it be in this context of like relationships, whether it be same-sex or heterosexual, or it could be, someone that's pursuing a career and just that's all they're about. And eventually they find that's not worth anything. Like you just constantly want to help people know I'm here for you now. I mean, you may not be interested in me right now, but when the fallout happens, I'm right back to seeing that there's promise and potential and hope because Christ sees that immediately if you turn to Him.
Yeah. This next, I'm going to ask two questions, and they kind of relate around the same idea. But the first one is given to us with pictures. Okay. So I am a science teacher. I am teaching 7th grade for the first time in a few years and was looking over the curriculum. I have to, by law, teach. Let me show you a few of the slides. They are ridiculous, and I don't think I'm going to share them. One of the pictures is about the idea of the gingerbread person, where it talks about the difference.
Gingerbread.
Genderbread.
Gingerbread.
Did I say ginger?
Yeah, you said
I knew I meant
gingerbread.
Gingerbread. So then there's the sex, which is different than who you're attracted to, which is different than your identity, and then which is different than your expression. So basically fourfold aspect of your sexuality. Yeah. And then there's gender-related definitions, again, kind of talking around the same thing, and then imagining a different gender. So it's all these kind of slides about the difference in sex and gender and taking those apart. And then her question is, what do or can I say or do? So how do you guys answer that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we were talking a little bit earlier. The bigger question is, it's broader than just the realm of education. It can be found in the medical realms and stuff like that. Like when you find yourself in a profession that's not really encouraging you, but telling you this is what you need to present, this is how you need to counsel, and you're a follower of Christ, and your religious conviction is not in alignment with what they're wanting you to do or say. What do you do? Mm-hmm. Yeah. What do you say? Pete?
I can tell you what Pete Goodman would do. I can't tell you what you should do.
Yeah.
I would push it as far as I could. I would see where the line was. And I can't tell you if that's integrity or not. I'd have to process it more. But that's how my brain works. If I was a teacher and they said, teach this, I'd be like, okay, how far can I go before they actually hold me accountable to teach this? Mm-hmm. And what will they actually do if I don't? Will I come to the point that I'm actually losing my job? I've found sometimes things like this, the threat is there, but the teeth actually aren't. And when people actually kind of just ignore it or don't do it, they actually don't end up getting in trouble. It's not always the case. But I do feel like if I was in this particular situation, I would push it as far as I could to know that the consequences were real before I actually capitulated or didn't capitulate. Because sometimes I'm like, no, I'm quitting. And it's like, well, actually, maybe they weren't going to push it anyway. Right. I don't know. Yeah. You gave the example of a psychiatrist working in a hospital. I imagine the consequences and the line is probably a lot stronger there than a 7th grade teacher whose principal probably doesn't like it either and probably won't even do anything if you don't do anything about it. Right. If you asked me to teach this to kids, Pete Goodman would resign. Because I think it's lying to children and unhealthy, and I would look for a different school or a different career. But I'm not saying that as like you should resign. I'm just telling you, like, I know where I'm at as a person. Right. If you push me to lie to kids, I'm going to be like, nope, sorry, I can't do this. But before I brought to that point, I would want to make sure, are you actually going to fire me if I don't do this? Because if I can kind of like, whatever, and just get through it. Yeah. I remember, I have a vivid memory of my 9th grade history teacher who was, I think, a pretty strong Christian and teaching through like Cro-Magnon man and things, and literally saying to us, for the record, I don't believe any of this stuff, but I'm required by law to teach it. So here you go. And they couldn't fire him because he taught us, but he stated his opinion. Would they fire you if you did that? I don't know. I'm completely talking from ignorance here. Right. I don't work in the education system. I just know what my personal values are. You couldn't get me to teach this to children. I would find a new career before I did that. But I also, if I could just take one step back, sorry. If you heard what I just said thinking Pete would judge me or be mad at me if I did, that's not how I meant it. I just meant, I know for me personally where my line is, what I would be, I couldn't be comfortable doing it.
Because there are, like, I know someone in our church that works in San Diego Unified School District, and they're pretty strong-handed. Like, this is part of the
like, you're fired if you don't, kind of thing.
Well, it's interesting because I would say that your point is important because they would say that, but there's not a lot of teeth to it. Right. This is a tenured teacher that's been there for a long time. But this person that I'm referring to, and I'm going to keep their identity anonymous, sees it as a place for the opportunity, like that she doesn't teach it, so to speak, but she almost is like in systematic theology, right? Like, here are the different views that people have.
Oh, I'd be comfortable with that.
And so she almost like will shift it to do it the different views.
Here's one possible view.
And emphasize this, but she also sees it as a way in which that she can be a light to try to bring truth. Right. But because she almost feels that as a calling, that her religious conviction is different than what you're expressed. And so that's why I think it's not a prescribed answer for everybody.
But I would do what you just said. If that was an option, I would do that. Yeah. If I could say like, hey, this is a view.
Right.
I don't subscribe if I was legally allowed to do that, I'd be comfortable with that. I do that all the time. Say things, I don't believe this, but this is a view.
Yeah.
That's different. I didn't know that was an option.
But I think that is a way that she's tried to like do it, and no one's pushed back.
Yeah, there you go.
So I think there is a part of like try to push, be creative, figure out what you can do, because there's a part of also hopefully bringing truth in these areas. And there's also pieces that are just like, man, like there are going to be times for all of us that it's just, I can't go past this place, and it might cost me something, whether it be my job or relationship and things like that. And that's a part of the difficult reality sometimes of following Jesus, that like when we really haven't in our culture as a whole been in that place where some of these types of things are becoming like, it's going to cost you something maybe to follow Jesus in our culture where it used to benefit you.
Yeah.
And so, man, I pray for people on the front lines in these areas, because it is messy, it's difficult, it's nuanced, and it could be dependent upon who's your manager, who's your boss, what do they think, There's so many different levels to it.
Yeah. And I also know that, and we said this before, I get a paycheck from an organization that opposes this stuff.
Yeah.
Like, if that's in this, I know I'm going to trigger some people. In this vein, that is the definition of privilege, right?
Sure.
Like, I have no fear. Not only do I not fear losing my job, I would lose my job if I supported this. Like, I'm coming from a place of privilege, from comfort, from ease, and I'm talking to someone who's living in the fire. I understand that. And I hope you hear that I know that about myself. I don't go home at night worrying about losing my job over this stuff. But I do I try to empathize and say, well, what if I did? What would I do? And I think there are some places that I would kind of be like, okay, whatever. This, like, no, like, I'm not going to tell a girl that she should be a boy. I'm not going to do it. And if that meant losing my job, I think I would lose my job over it. But that's just Pete Goodman. It's just Pete Goodman. So,
talking about, bringing it home and making it personal. The next question really does that. What is the best way to talk to your young kids about the LGBTQ plus community? For example, when a friend from school has 2 moms or 2 dads, or a student at their school is going through a gender transition. So that brings that, kind of ideological question. It brings it home with, maybe your kid who knows someone on the baseball field or at school or something.
I think, Christopher alluded to this yesterday. I think one, be willing to engage the conversation. I would say that, like, and maybe engage it earlier than you thought you were ready for, only because of how much it's a part of their life. You have to kind of gauge what that means. I try so hard when I talk with my children about this. I don't play devil's advocate, say, hey, here's what the other side says. But I just really want to make sure my kids have empathy in their heart, because people are people. And so I don't want to try to demonize or ostracize people that are wrestling with these things, but to say, what does this look like, and what God deems to be best? And what are some of the things that you have a hard time pursuing that are God's best in your life, because your feelings tell you otherwise? And try to help you understand where this person's coming from. And trying to, like, you want to create a place where they see the scriptures as firm foundation for truth. But man, I want my sons and my daughters to be able to befriend and love and to be there, and not to just be a source of condemnation to these individuals who generally are probably already feeling that. It was interesting though, because so we've recently had these conversations more and more, because some of my kids have people that they know, but it's so stinking confusing. So last night we're at the worship night, and my son comes up to me, and in all innocence, he asks me, he points to a couple people there, and he goes, Dad, are they gay? And I was like, why? I mean, this is the middle of worship thing. Right. I was like, why? What are you asking for? And part of it is he sat in yesterday with the conversation with Christopher. We had this conversation about a week ago about something. And so now he's looking, when he just sees like platonic 2 guys having friendship, he's wondering, like, are they gay? Are they not? Like, how do I? And so I can just see his head spinning, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, what a difficult world to try to live in and process as a young kid, because now you're like, are they this? Are they that? And so then it helps bring more clarity. But I'm like, I'm learning as I go. I mean, that's important to say too. Like, as I go, I'm not afraid to engage it. I want to have love with it, truth in it, but like, I'm learning as I go too. And the way I talk about it to one child is different than another child, because I can just see, like my youngest daughter, her heart is so big with feelings that her heart just breaks over it. Where, my oldest son is a little bit more dogmatic. He cares, but he's just like, well, that's wrong. Like, it is, but like, where's the love? Where the other's like, oh, I was like, but we still have to have some truth. And trying to bring it both there. So it's hard. It's so hard. Yes. Don't avoid it though, because someone's going to talk about it with him. Someone's going to talk about it with him.
That's huge.
Yeah.
Okay, so as far as the questions go that were kind of the catch-all of the harder ones, those were them.
Yeah.
We did a pretty good job about addressing questions as they came in.
Yeah.
And so this past week, we didn't really have any like finalizing of the questions as far as like people sending in a huge rush of hard questions. So for everyone who's been listening, the past 9 weeks, we have addressed those really hard topics. And so if there is one that you are interested in, definitely listen to those. The other questions I have are kind of, it's a catch-all. Like that's Fair. So before we transition, is there any like statement you want to say regarding yesterday or the conversation that we had?
I mean, I'm just glad we were able to do it personally.
Yeah.
I think I told him afterwards because he was so nervous.
Wow.
I just told Brandon, like, my friend Chris says, like, he has this like cool customer vibe about him. But you get to know him, he's like, I was so, like, I just didn't know.
Yeah.
I said, dude, I think yesterday was, for a lot of people, the first ray of hope they had heard in a long time. And like just this sense of like, well, it's impossible, give up on it. And here's this person sitting on stage saying, I haven't given up. And I was like, hope is powerful. You know, hope is just like, oh, even if it's small, even if it's like, well, somebody found life here. Like somebody found the ability to follow Jesus in this. That means there is hope. And to be a church that brings hope and healing, like to bring hope means we have to be able to say like, look, this can work. And I was so grateful, and I am grateful to him just as a person. And like he called himself a relic. And I'm like, yeah, but you're a relic of hope.
Yeah.
And you're a relic showing that something actually can work here. So yeah, I just was so grateful for him to be able to come and do it. I have like a comparison to like these types of interviews over the last 5 years of trying to wade into some difficult topics. And I can just say, I'm proud of our church. I know we've stretched people of trying to say, hey, let's engage in this. And sometimes they're like, where do you stand on this? Because you kind of like are right in the middle, which is on purpose at times because I want the people to kind of consider things. But, not that like Monday morning is the basis of whether that something's good or not, but like, I have far less emails. I don't know if I have any emails yet on Monday morning comparatively to some conversations we've had in years past. And I honestly I'm proud of our church to say we're willing to listen and keep learning and growing together. And I think that is a sign of maturity, but also like just a sign of like of hopefulness of saying, okay, like this is important and there's hope to be found in this, even if it's hard. Yeah. So
I was really excited and looking forward to this conversation since we like started talking about it happening all the way until Sunday morning. And then is when I started getting really nervous. Like, was this a bad idea? Was this, and it just goes to show the danger of like making a caricature of anything. And for me, what I did was I made a caricature of East County. Like East County has these specific thoughts and specific views, and this is not going to go over well, and so for me, it was a beacon of hope. It was a like, oh yeah, okay, you're right. Like we wade into those waters and we trust that God is doing the work. Yeah. And so, like I said, I was excited about it all the way until Sunday morning when I started getting like, oh man, what are we doing? And so I was really glad it happened.
Cool.
All right. On to the catch-all. This one goes to Robert's message.
Is it like a lightning round type thing?
Yeah, probably.
Okay.
This one goes into Robert's message from a couple weeks ago. He talks about how he killed his dog Mabel, which is also what.
Oh, that's what it was about. I was like, who's Mabel?
Yeah. So when Robert had to put his dog down, but it made it sound like he did it himself.
Clarity: he had the veterinarian put the dog to sleep.
Yes, that was another one of those hallway conversations where people were like,
he did not shoot the dog out back.
Do dogs go to heaven? Do dogs know how to pray? What about all the other creatures? Didn't God make them all too? Where do they get to go? Lightning round.
Go ahead. I feel like Jean wanted to. You had this like sense of like, oh, I like this kind of stuff. So I say like, let's hear it. Let's hear it.
So I did look at it beforehand. The only thing I would say is there's an assumption of, what about all the other creatures? Didn't God make them all too? So the assumption is because God made them, therefore they go to heaven. And I don't think that is a correct assumption, right? Because God made a lot of things. God made a lot of creatures. He made angels. He made, so the fact that God made something doesn't automatically qualify it to go to heaven. So that's one of them. And then the other thing is the next assumption is, where do they go? And it's like, what if they don't go anywhere? Like, why do they have to go somewhere after death? What if death is the end for these creatures that don't have the breath of God, the Spirit of God inside of them? And so that would be, I would say that because it is created by God is not an immediate assumption that it's going to heaven, and also they don't have the breath of God in them, so they probably don't have that eternal life. And so I would say no.
Do you have a dog?
I do have a dog.
Oh,
Bailey.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
That would be my answer.
I would have had that answer, but I read Randy Alcorn's book Heaven years ago, and I just felt he made an interesting. He talked about the restoration of Eden.
Yeah, I believe there will be animals in heaven.
Okay,
I just don't think it'll be the same ones that we knew on this earth, or in the new earth.
Okay.
Brandon wants his dog in heaven.
If Winnie gets to heaven, then awesome. I don't need Winnie in heaven. I just thought it was interesting. That's a book that was like, it just had some things like, perhaps there could be some animals and things like that. And we're uniquely made in God's image while other creatures are not.
Correct.
And so the pathway to heaven and God's spirit and breath and all those types of things may not be the same. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't know.
Right.
I don't know. That's what Chris taught us yesterday. I don't know.
It's a good answer. Yeah.
I mean,
it's hard.
I don't know. This is. Look, I'm like,
here comes Dr. Goodman.
Oh, heaven was not created for animals. Heaven wasn't created for you. You were an animal.
Right. Yeah.
As far as I can tell theologically, the only reason you are spending any time in heaven at all is because death entered the picture because of our sin. And eventually we're going to be coming back and be resurrected here on earth where animals belong. So if you want to rephrase the question and say, will animals be resurrected along with humans that are faithful in Jesus, which is what Corinthians and Thessalonians all talk about, not going to heaven, resurrection. Mm-hmm. Like when I am resurrected here on earth in the new heaven and new earth, I'm not in heaven, I'm here. Right. My brain has a problem with it, which is if you resurrected every animal that ever lived over, let's even just go with the fundamentalist view that the earth is 10,000 years old. If you resurrected every dinosaur, every ant, come on, what are we talking about here? Like you would, like there wouldn't be a square inch of the planet not covered with an animal. I mean, like, I just think like the idea that we would resurrect animals feels like my brain is like, how could that even logically be possible? But I gave the same answer to somebody that asked me if aliens existed the other day. I said, I don't think so. But if I find out they do, I'll be like, oh, there they are. So if I get to heaven and Cooper is sitting there with me, I'll be like, oh, there you are.
I used to, and I think I don't know what I think. Whatever. But I remember like being like, oh, aliens? Absolutely. You think there's not any other life outside of this? Mm-hmm. And I met Pete in college. I remember having a conversation with my aunt and Pete late at night in a dorm room. And
about
Pete,
aliens?
Yes. And Pete shredded any hope that I had in aliens. Not that I had hope in aliens.
I don't remember that.
Yeah, my aunt would tell you about it too.
What a combo
of people.
Okay.
Yeah. It was so random. And it was like, it actually was a really good conversation because there's other parts that really deposited great seeds in my aunt's heart that Pete had shared, and my wife, anyway, it's a really cool story. But I just remember like it was the first time I thought maybe there aren't aliens, and I was like, E.T. no. But anyway,
I would be more inclined to believe in aliens
than dogs.
That a dog
what
can be
in
resurrected.
the world? What's the next question?
Okay, so speaking of resurrection in faith in Jesus Christ, does lukewarm Christianity get you into heaven? So lukewarm coming from Revelation, where Jesus says you're neither hot nor cold, so I'll spit you out. Does that form of Christianity get you into heaven? And what do you think they are meaning when they say lukewarm? And I guess as Pete would think, is getting into heaven the goal? Anyway.
I remember where that passage was at in Laodicea. I was there 3 months ago. But I remember the first time I went there in seminary. And the professor, first off, the idea of lukewarm, like it goes with the context of where it's at, with like Laodicea and these areas had like hot water springs, cold water, and Laodicea pulled water from both. And so there's something to be said also about like not just one's fervency for Christ, but also their identity in Christ and where they're pulling their identity. There's a lot that's in that passage. But the professor talked about like in the same verse or same letter to Laodiceans, he said, behold, I stand at the door and I knock. And if you open, I'll come to you. And the question was, he's like, how did Jesus get outside the door? Like, right? Somehow he was in the inside, and then now he's back and he's still knocking. So he's saying, I'll still give you hope, but he's writing to a church that already said that had been planted. And so his thing was like, it goes back to last week. Can you lose your salvation?
Yeah.
Did you it seems like the lukewarm is more, they just stopped pursuing Christ, and they really didn't stay on fire for him or even have anything to do with him. So Jesus was now outside the door knocking. I'm still want to come in, but it's up to you.
Yeah.
So in that vein, it would be like, lukewarm is not a good indictment. I don't necessarily would say in or out. Like, you just don't want to be lukewarm, so why don't you control that, and then you don't have to worry about the question.
Yeah. It is interesting that when you put it in the context of Jesus talking to the church, because we like to use it as a behold, I stand at the door and knock.
He's talking
to the
church.
To evangelism.
Yeah,
You know,
it's
like
a church
God's
that Paul
in the-
planted.
Yeah. Yeah. So it is interesting. It does change the context of that.
I've heard it taught too. The whole thing about the aqueducts and things, I think is so cool. That really changed the way I read it. I heard somebody do a talk using that analogy, not analogy, but that historical context of like how hot water and cold water are not good and bad. You're not in the middle of good and bad. Hot water and cold water are both good. They both have great purposes.
Right.
You've become nothing.
Yeah.
You're worthless. Like, hot water is great for taking a shower, cooking food. Cold water is great for drinking refreshment. Lukewarm water is worthless. And like, the indictment being, you're not impacting the world around you anymore. Salt has lost its saltiness. Mm-hmm. And I think if you look at Jesus' words that way, which that kind of helped me, we look at it in this way of like, well, how much sinning can I do before I stop being a Christian? Mm-hmm. And that's even, I think that feels like, did I do enough to get into heaven?
Yeah,
which that's not what we believe brings about resurrection anyway. But it's more like, have you lost the part of you that's supposed to be really making a difference and showing change and being a light and like impacting the world and even impacting your own life? Is Christianity impacting your own life, or is it just like, so yeah, I think it's, if you're tying this question to how much good do I have to do versus bad to get into heaven? Well, man, let's go back and talk about grace and faith in general. If you're talking about what does it mean to live a life that is impactful and brings about goodness and changes the world and changes your life, being lukewarm is just a waste of time. And it just like, ugh, why? Yeah. So yeah, I think it's a question.
That's a question that my wife probably wouldn't like, because she likes her oatmeal very lukewarm. And she also likes her coffee lukewarm and her water lukewarm.
So she wouldn't say lukewarm's worthless.
She would say
it's worthwhile.
Like she does not like the extreme.
But does she like lukewarm water?
Yes.
She likes to drink lukewarm water. Like, just
ice water, she's not a fan of. Lukewarm. It's weird. Okay, last question. Why does the
Ben just pointed himself. You drink lukewarm water?
Oh my gosh, Ben.
That's
Ben just like shrugs. He's like, I'm not going to say anything.
I'm not mic'd up.
Okay.
Okay, so why does the United States go to work 5 days a week when we say that we serve the Almighty God? So again, the assumption is that the United States say that they serve the Almighty God. Whatever you put most of your times towards is your God. So the God of the United States must be money. So there's a couple assumptions in there.
Yeah.
One, that the United States says that we serve the Almighty God. Two, that whatever you put most of your time towards is your God. How do we feel about that? And if it's true, shouldn't we be working less days here at Rise?
Did you try to get yourself a day off? Do you see how that just worked?
Christians should only have a 2-day work day.
He looked me right in the eyes and says, why do we work 5 days at Rise City? I'm like, you lazy bum.
No, okay, but seriously.
Oh man, the second part is probably the part that I would go after the most. Whatever you put your most of your time to is your God.
That is quite the assumption.
I don't even think you can justify that anywhere. Like going about life and working and providing for your family and bringing goodness to the world around you. I mean, doing something that helps build or create. I mean, like, giving your time to a job doesn't make the job your God. I think like the only place you could pull that from is in Jesus's comments about the love of money, and Timothy as well. But like the idea that if my motivating factor is accumulating wealth over being faithful to God and things, that's a different conversation. But this is sort of, maybe that's what this person meant. Like, the pursuit of wealth above all things if that's what they meant, then we've talked about that before. But
and in today's American culture, though, a 5-day work week, you're taking a break. You know what I mean? Like it's supposed to be like 24/7 grind. You're always working to make your dreams come true. So if someone's actually taking a full weekend, that's actually like oh wow.
Well, the Bible doesn't tell us to work 5 days; it tells us to work 6 days.
Yeah, exactly.
Like we're already we've already scaled back what the Bible actually calls for.
Yeah, John. So why are you asking?
Yeah, you want more time off,
Come
John?
on.
Why are you so lazy? Come on.
I have no comment. No comeback. No comment here. Ben, you want to join? Yeah, but that's it.
That's a wrap.
Those are our questions.
Okay.
8-9 weeks of tripping hazards where we got to have real casual conversations here on Monday mornings.
Yeah.
Whew.
First Thessalonians is the new
Digging Deeper
new thing.
continues.
Continue
But in a
with that.
different-
Yeah. Be more back to kind of probably talking about what the previous day was, kind of behind the scenes, things that were cut, things that stuck out, and then. But I think it's important. Like we want to make Digging Deeper something that is, something we're talking, but we'd love to hear from you. So I think whether it's all of the ways to contact us is our first name with @risecchurch.com. So if you've got questions for Digging Deeper or any of those things, please let us know because we always like to try to do new things, but also like, what are you wrestling with or what are the things you're curious about? And let's do the best we can to dig into it.
And if you just happen to save that phone number, it's always active.
It is.
Anonymous number.
It is.
So
it's
it won't,
619 something. I don't know the rest of it. So.
663 or something around there.
619-663-7753. I don't know, but
visual
why don't you go ahead and try that? See what
Ask that person.
why did they just ask me that? What kind of question is that? Yeah. So,
well, that's it.
all right. That's
Thank you
a
guys
wrap.
for listening, and we'll see you next week.
See you, everybody.